Professor Michael Quay, whose ruling, is being held up as the precedent in this argument, himself says that, well, the circumstances are different. In his case, the matter was brought up by the political parties, which is what led to the ruling he gave, and that is what he expects to happen in order for this situation to be the same as his situation. Do you agree?
I think in order to understand things better, we have to move beyond different factual circumstances. Otherwise, we would have to be evaluating things every time from case to case. And I think that's a bit confusing. So perhaps we should look at things from a more principled standpoint. And the big question we ask ourselves is, whose agent is the MP? Is an MP the agent of the Constitution? Is he an agent of the party? Or does he represent himself? I would argue that the MP is mainly an agent of the Constitution. And then secondarily, he is an agent of the party. And the reason I argue is because the MP, when in Parliament, he is not recognized ordinarily as a member of a party. He is recognized as a member of Parliament. And that is why Parliament as a body is a body. The parties are only a vehicle to enter Parliament. Now, if you go to elementary principles, the Constitution says whatever is in violation of the Constitution is void. That means if anybody acts in a manner which is considered unconstitutional, regardless of the activation of a process by a party, by a citizen of Ghana, by other members of Parliament, regardless of anybody taking any step, the action is intrinsically void. So therefore, if a person sits in Parliament unqualified, and in this case, if the person, for example, crossed carpets, and by reason of that, the person is supposed to lose his membership of Parliament, if that person continues to sit in Parliament, whether or not a party reports, whether or not a party takes steps, and therefore the speaker acts in a manner that ultimately results in the expulsion of the person, whether or not any such thing happens, the person would have been sitting in Parliament unconstitutionally, which means the person would have been sitting in Parliament unqualified, which also then means the person would have committed a constitutional crime as it is spelled out in the Constitution. That therefore undermines the argument that a party should be the one ordinarily to report, or even a member of Parliament, or whether or not we should even do anything at all about this before something happens. It undermines that argument because the person would have fundamentally violated the Constitution or the constitutional requirements that you should sit in Parliament only when qualified. Which then leads to the other question. If a person sits in Parliament unelected, or rather unconstitutionally, so to speak, the person's actions by way of voting and other consequential remedies, which includes his representation of the people he's supposed to have been elected into Parliament for, that representation will have been nullified. That has a huge consequence and repercussion. And that is what fundamentally undermines the argument that the obligation to correct that, or the obligation to ensure that that doesn't happen, is exclusively reposed in a party. It undermines that argument. Because what that means is if a party doesn't take steps to do that, it means we are condoning the unconstitutionality. It means we are accepting what is otherwise wrongful. And it means that the people for whom that particular MP is supposed to be in Parliament or representing, those people would have been without a representative. The whole repercussion is so huge that one party cannot have an exclusive right to mediate the process. And that is why, in my opinion, everybody actually technically has a right to report this. In fact, members of Parliament can do that. The parties can do that. Non-members of Parliament, ordinary Ghanaian citizens, can petition the Speaker of Parliament to ensure that such an anomaly is rectified if ever a thing like that happens. So I do not think that ordinarily this is exclusively vested in the party, for which cause in the absence of the party's report, anything can't happen. I need to hasten to add that the structure or the framing of the provision itself in the Constitution, Article 97, doesn't even mention reporting, so to speak. The Constitution says that the person shall primarily take the step himself. A person becomes disqualified if he crosses carpets. So ordinarily, even the reporting part is a secondary thing. If the person doesn't himself take steps to report himself to the speaker, or just stop being a representative, then we have the secondary step of that person being reported. And I can understand the argument the former speaker was making, that because he's a member of the party, ordinarily the party will report. But we should also not forget the fact that parties may have an incentive not to report a thing like this, and which would lead to all the things that I've said earlier, whether we are condoning unconstitutionality with all the consequences that follow if we follow the exclusivity argument.